Maybe on them. Okay, thought I heard an echo for a moment, but it's gone. Good evening. Welcome everybody it's nice to see a crowd. Thanks for joining us for our November 30th Board of County Commissioners business meeting. I'm just going to give you a little bit of ad-libbed explanation about our meetings. I forgot my computer today, so I don't have my script, but I'll just give you a bit of information about public comment and how we will kind of run that throughout the meeting. So there are two different types of public comment. One is general public comment. That is an opportunity near the beginning of our meeting to make public comment about anything that is not on today's agenda. So if you came here for a specific agenda item, which I assume most of you did, then you'll have an opportunity after a presentation and questions from the commissioners has been done on our regular agenda. And then we will open it up for public comment and invite folks to come speak one at a time. And then we'll close public comment, have further discussion as a commission, and then give direction, take a vote or give direction to staff. So with both types of public comment, you will have 3 minutes, and we ask that you please state your name and Douglas County residence for the meeting minutes, please, and also direct all of your comments at the County Commission. We also do not record our general public comment near the beginning of our meeting, but all of those comments are available to watch live or here in the commission meeting. We also reserve the right to remove anybody who is rude, vulgar, or inappropriate. And we do ask that you please mind the time. Sarah here, our county administrator, will have some little handy note cards next to you just to keep folks on track and give everybody the opportunity to share their thoughts with the commission this evening. Commissioners, have I missed any major things? Okay, thank you. With that, we will jump into our consent agenda. Does anybody wish to remove anything for further comment? Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
I'd like to remove items 1 and 2 from the consent agenda. I actually had conversations with the sheriff's office on these, and had my questions answered, but I think it's good for the public to get a chance to hear them too.
Okay, great. Would you like to make a motion for the other items on our consent agenda?
Sure. I move that we approve items 1.3 through 1.10 on the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the general public comment section that I just described. Is there anybody here who wishes to provide general public comment?
Do we not want to take those 2 items?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for rewinding for me. Commissioner Willie, you asked to pull items 1.1 and 1.2. Do we have Sheriff Armbruster online? Sorry for speeding ahead, everybody.
Don't see him here for the presentation.
We have.
Oh, hi, there you are. Hi, Major.
Generally, for this, we would just, if you have a few things you want to say, and then the commission.
I can start with a question if you'd rather. Okay, so the first one was the TASER package. And so one of my questions was, why is it a no bid item, which I did get that question answered, but I'd like to have you talk about that some. And then what is involved with that and what that gives to the department. So.
Sure. The TASER is manufactured by Axon. Axon is sole source. It's the only company that provides a TASER. A TASER fires a cartridge. There's a difference between a TASER and a stun gun. And it's the only TASERs. The current TASER that we carry is the X26P. The manufacturer recommends a 5-year lifespan of that. Some of ours are from 2013. That's 9 years. With any kind of high-tech conducted energy weapon such as a TASER, those electronic components can fail. And if they fail in the field, it's a danger to the deputy, to the public, and to the suspect. So we're asking to replace those.
Right, and that was one of the things that I did get answered, was that there is no other company that makes something similar to this. And that's one of the non-lethal methods that we have.
It's less lethal.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from commission?
No.
Okay. And this was for a contract, sorry, the contract is for a 5-year period? Okay, so thank you.
Commissioner Willie, did you also have any questions about items 1.2?
Need a motion on that item.
Oh, you want to take them separately? Thank you.
I would, if there are no other questions, Do we take public comment on something pulled from the
You
consent?
moved it off. You have to
Yeah.
open it up for public
Yep,
comment.
thank you for keeping me on track with process. A little discombobulated. Okay, we'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Is there anybody here who wishes to provide public comment on this agenda item? Okay, seeing no hands, I'll double check if anybody's online. I forgot to say earlier, for anybody listening online, please plan to use the raise your hand function if you wish to make public comment. Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring that back for a motion.
I would make the motion to approve item 1.1 that was moved off the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, for item 1.2, Commissioner Millie, I'll let you ask a question first.
Major, are you willing to take another question here too? So I read through the items on the live scan and I was pretty excited about the project. And it was also a no bid item, so that's what made me flag it. But I'm also really excited about the potential for this program. And I wondered if you would just talk to us and talk also to the public a little bit about where this came from and what you hope to accomplish with it.
LifeScan is a company based out of Tampa, Florida. Cardiovascular disease and cancer is very prevalent in public safety. LifeScan is designed for early detection and treatment of those. LifeScan is unique and it provides comprehensive exams to include ultrasound of your organs and cardiovascular system, such as arteries and heart valves. What's unique about them is they send their staff on site. There's not another company that does that for public safety that we know of. It would serve 138 personnel with the cost of asked for. And it's not a mandatory, it would be voluntary. But LifeScan is very unique and they've saved hundreds of lives.
I noticed in the literature, a lot of it's geared towards, I mean, all first responders, but firefighters in particular, because of the highlighted, the higher cancer risks. And I did also flag that. I saw Chief Llewellyn was here. I did flag it for him also to see if perhaps Sheriff's Office wanted to have a discussion with LDCFM or maybe even the volunteer fire departments about if there could be some additional involvement. So they just, that's not part of the vote we have tonight, but I'd sure like to see that discussion continue if it can. So, all right.
Thank you for those questions.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Does anybody here wish to make public comment on this item? Okay, seeing no hands, we'll double check for virtual hands on Zoom. Okay, we'll close for public comment and I'll bring this back if it's okay with you. Commissioner Billy, I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of LifeScan public safety physical exams for Sheriff's Office public safety staff in the amount of $90,000 in 2023.
I would second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Okay. Now that we've rewound, we'll go back up to speed and jump into general public comment. Just as a reminder, this is an opportunity for you to speak about any county business to the commission that is not on today's agenda. Is there anybody here who wishes to provide general public comment? Okay. Anybody online, Sarah? All right, we will close general public comment and move right on into our regular agenda. Item 3.1 is a presentation from zoning and codes.
Review, Carl.
Good evening, commissioners. Again, my name is Carl Bauer. I'm the county planner over in the Zoning and Codes office. Tonight, we'll be discussing a temporary business use for a meteorological evaluation tower, or MET. The tower is approximately 198 feet tall, or 60.26 meters, and is located just southeast of the intersection of North 450 Road and East 200 Road. So first, a little bit of background. This permit is requested from NextEra Energy Resources. They're requesting to install a meteorological evaluation tower at the location that I just mentioned. I have some images of what the tower will look like. It's a guy wired tower. almost 198 feet tall. These towers are used to collect data on weather patterns to gauge the viability of potential future wind energy projects. And this application is for a MET only. It's not for turbines. It's not for a wind energy project. The only thing being considered with this temporary business use application is this specific tower. So these types of applications have been brought before this board in the past. In 2018, a SODAR unit from NextEra was approved as a temporary business use. And then just last year, there was another meteorological evaluation equipment approved for solar. And that was just last year. The meteorological evaluation tower is erected in just one day. It arrives in a package. It isn't anticipated to generate any considerable traffic. There's no lighting, there's no blinking lights associated with this tower. The Federal Aviation Administration requires lights if a tower is over 200 feet in height. This tower is just about 2 feet below that threshold, so no lights are necessary. This structure is strictly temporary. The applicant has said that it'll remain in place for about 5 years. There's no foundation or permanent structures being installed, and the tower is anchored to the ground with wires. Surrounding land uses are primarily agricultural with some scattered rural residences. There is a Catholic church nearby as well. The property itself is void of any structural development. There was a house on the property, but it hasn't been in place for approximately 70 years. To give you an idea of the location, you see Overbrook in the bottom left side of the image there and Lone Star Lake in the top right side of the image. The red dot is where the tower is going to be located, and you see St. Francis Church just to the east there. As far as sensitive lands, there is floodplain on the property, but the tower will be located outside of the floodplain. There are also some wetlands, but again, those aren't being disturbed as a part of this project. Also, we have some prime soil that's indicated in green. As far as what the tower will look like, these are the plans submitted by the applicant. So you can see that it's a 197-foot tower, 197 feet, 8-inch tower secured to the ground with guy wires. And then as far as the staff review, there are several different criteria that we look at with a temporary business use application. First of those, adverse impacts on the environment. We don't require an environmental review with a temporary business use, but we did have some environmental concerns with this application, primarily related to wildlife impacts. We did receive a public comment from a local biologist, and he has specifically pointed to impacts to birds and bats. We did reach out to the applicant with some questions about that, and they provided the responses that you see on your screen there. They have some bat acoustic systems to keep the bats away, and the site will be monitored. Additionally, there's no foundation or permanent equipment being installed as a part of this request. This helps minimize the impact to the prime soils and the agricultural lands. So when this tower does come down, it'll be virtually indistinguishable from what the site looks like right now. And the recommended conditions of approval further serve to mitigate any adverse environmental impacts. As far as detrimental effect to neighboring properties, again, there's no blinking lights as a part of this request. It's under the requirement for the FAA. Staff isn't aware of any airport or airstrip in the immediate vicinity. We did reach out to the Topeka and Lawrence airports. They didn't have anything against this. We did have some concern about nearby heritage sites. This is about 1.5 miles from the original route of the Santa Fe Trail. We did reach out to the National Park Service's National Trails Division. They said that ruts in the area would be difficult to discern because of the plowed fields. We are aware of a map that does show some ruts nearby. They also didn't believe that the tower would degrade the experience of any tourists traveling the trail route. As far as the public gain, this will provide the applicant's organization with meteorological data to gauge the viability of a potential future wind energy project. As far as public services availability, this is going to generate very little traffic. It's installed in one day. Surrounding land uses, as I mentioned, rural residences. It's primarily agricultural. There is a church just to the east. We haven't identified any conflicts with those uses. Adequacy of continued maintenance. The applicant has indicated that there will be local land agents that they've employed that will monitor the site and address any issues that arise. They'll also be monitoring it for security. The applicant has indicated that there won't be any climbing apparatus to the tower, and that's been a concern of ours in the past. I'd also like to talk about neighbor notification. This application is being processed as a temporary business use, which comes directly to you. It doesn't go before the planning commission. So this is the first public hearing on this item. The county zoning code requires that property owners within half a mile of the site be notified. So everything in green on that map, those property owners were notified. In total, we sent out 27 letters, and those were sent out on October 31st. Additionally, we have this information posted on the City of Lawrence's wind energy information site, and I have the link to that website on the screen there. We did reach out to some agencies for comment. Main concerns were related to wildlife. And again, we reached out to the National Park Service and they didn't have any issue with this request. We have had several rural landowners reach out to us in the last few days asking about tonight's meeting, as well as what the temporary business use process is like. And I went out to the site last week. Here's some photos. This is looking west on North 450 Road. The approximate location of the tower would be right about here where my cursor is. Then this is looking south at the property from North 450 Road. As you can see, the property is currently grazed. There are some cattle there. And then looking southwest, the tower will be located on this hill right about here, approximately 500 feet back from the road. So with that, staff is recommending approval. The applicant has requested a 5-year period, but staff is recommending approval for a 1-year period with the possibility of extension, along with 12 conditions that you see on your screen. I'll point some of them out, like there can't be any lighting. This approval is only for a Met tower and for any ancillary equipment. All structures have to be removed upon decommissioning. The applicant has to secure insurance for the property and submit proof of insurance to our office. A building permit has to be obtained. The local land agents have to monitor the site for any wildlife kills. Our staff has access to the site with 24 hours notice. If there's any change in property owner, applicant, or their designee's contact information, they have to let us know about that. All external agencies, rules and regulations have to be continually followed. And then again, this temporary business use is renewable on an annual basis of up to 5 years. And with that, I'm available for any questions. The applicant is present as well.
Thank you, Carl. One just quick question. You mentioned a couple of fairly recent similar temporary business use permits. Can you just talk about the timeframe set on those? Are those also annual review, or help me refresh my memory, at least of last year's solar Met?
The one last year was approved for 3 years, so that one's still in effect. That one is a much less intense use. That's just a small structure on the ground. I think it's about 12 feet tall. This one is a much more intense use. It's a much taller structure. So that's another concern. We're not as concerned about wildlife with the other one. So
Okay. And then has there been one of these towers in Douglas County in recent history that you're aware of?
this is the first one I'm aware of
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
for a tower like this.
Slide, just if there was one.
That was for a SODAR unit, which is a much smaller structure that's used to measure sound and turbulence in the atmosphere. That's also used for wind energy. The applicant can probably talk about that a little more.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So about 2014-ish, 2015-ish or so, there were some data towers for collecting wind energy data that were erected in the southwest part of Douglas County. It was one on North 400 Road that was near me that I part of my walking area. So do we know how tall were those and are they similar or, and Tanya might have been around then.
I don't have that
None of you.
information in front of me.
Okay, so I know we've had these in the past. I'm just not sure if this is apples to apples, the same kind of thing, or if there'd be anybody who could answer that question.
Carl, I think that's something we'd probably have to talk to Lawrence planning about, because they probably would have handled that item back in 2014.
Any former planning commissioner?
I remember it as well.
I remember it. But I wouldn't,
Mhm.
other than approving one, I know that's all that I remember. We didn't follow up with any more data that I'm aware of.
Process wise, why did it come to the planning commission then and not now?
I think, I'm not sure if it was a temporary, but I'd have to look. I don't know off the top of my head, but I do remember one coming sometime back when I was on the planning commission.
It may not have been filed as a temporary business unit or TBU the first time. And before, at that point in time, I don't believe we had wind regulations. So that may have caused it to go to planning commission. But normally a temporary business use does not comes directly to us. But obviously, we've also changed our regulations since 2014.
Sure. And I was not involved with the public process at that time, just from walking under the tower. So I think there were at least two.
I remember at least one.
Yeah. That's one line of questioning that won't go anywhere then. I'll have others. Do you want to?
I do have one more that I hope is brief. Can you just help describe, and I'm not sure if our, codes around temporary business use really lay this out, or maybe it's just helpful to understand in this particular situation. This also may be a question for the applicant that I can put on hold, but I'll pitch it to you first, Carl. Can you talk to me about the relationship of a landowner and any sort of both the relationship to the business who's applying for the temporary business unit and any responsibility of the landowner, or will all conditions and responsibilities be solely on the applicant, the business who is requesting to use the land for that? That was kind of a confusing question. I don't know if.
I don't know the details of the lease for this property. That question would probably be best directed to the applicant.
Sure. Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Quite a few questions for the applicant when we get to that point. I also, and Sarah, you can weigh in on what the timing of this might be, but I'd like to talk about kind of the timeline of when we had a moratorium, when we worked on wind regulations, when we brought into the moratorium, when the wind regulations got reopened recently, and how people will be able to speak into the public process from there forward. It doesn't have to be now but I do want to make sure that we kind of cover where we've been with wind, because this is not our first rodeo with it, and where we're going from here.
I did ask County Councilor John Bullock to attend via Zoom, and I'm moving him into the panel. I'm putting him on the spot here. I didn't prep him for this question, so John, if you're able to answer any of those questions, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I was joining the meeting when Commissioner Willie was stating her questions. So because of that process, I didn't hear them. Unfortunately, I'm happy to try to respond. If Commissioner, you could restate those questions. I'm sorry.
Sure, and I'll give a little background there. So I live in Southwest Douglas County that's been approached for a wind project, for a potential wind project, I should say, about 8 years ago, and then again more recently. And so the county has had interactions for a project like this and never had an application for one. But can you cover the timeline of what's happened in the past? Both, we had a moratorium for a time, then while the county was working on regulations, and the moratorium was lifted and regulations adopted. And now those regulations are back, I think, on your desk and with the planning staff that will roll out to the public in a couple of weeks, including us. Can you just add to that timeline or flesh that out?
Yeah, I don't have specific dates at my fingertips, as Sarah mentioned, but my recollection of this is that back in the day. It might have been 2014, 2015, as you said. I can't remember when it was. We had an application come in for a meteorological tower. And I don't remember if it was processed as a temporary business use or under some other tower regulation. You know, we have zoning provisions that relate to other types of towers, but regardless, the planning staff and county leadership at that time identified that we did not have any wind farm regulations on the books, and there was a desire to talk about enacting some. And so the county enacted by resolution a moratorium on any applications for wind farm development. And I believe the initial moratorium was about 6 months. And legally, you can have a moratorium, but you can't have a perpetual moratorium that lasts forever. So it's important to put a definition on how long it's going to last. At that time, then the planning staff and the planning commission worked on the wind regulations. There may have been an extension to the moratorium, but eventually those regulations did come before the county commission and were adopted. To my knowledge, there has not been an application under those regulations, and Commissioner, that's what you indicated is your understanding as well. More recently, after the promulgation of the new solar energy regulations, someone initiated the question, should we revisit the wind farm regulations? It wasn't me, but I'm not sure who it was. And so my understanding is the planning staff then has worked up a draft of some wind farm regulations that would be revised compared to what we had passed before as a county. And I've looked at a draft and given my comments on it. My understanding is it's going to come before the Planning Commission sometime in December. That may generate some further revisions to those regulations. And eventually my expectation would be that it would become before the county commission for action. Again, to my knowledge, there's not a pending application for a wind farm development, but I wouldn't necessarily know that either. You know, it would be planning staff or county administration like zoning and codes would know that, but I haven't heard about it.
Thank you. We actually have zoning and codes here, so they could fill that in.
We have not received any wind farm application yet.
Thank you.
Commissioner Willie, if I may, the power of the internet is a strong thing. So I was able to find the 2014 meteorological tower that was approved as a conditional use permit for a 60-meter tower. And to your question, I think one of the items bulleted there is that the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners approved a resolution in 2013 to establish a moratorium on wind farms, but amended their interpretation to allow the applications for data collection to proceed. So I think that's maybe answers a little bit of the sequence of that.
And was that the tower on North 400 Road about?
Yes, North 400 and East 1000 Road on the south side.
Okay, so there likely wasn't another, there's only one
Yeah, that
that we.
for meteorological towers approved by the Douglas County Planning Commission. So
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
I can fill in for John Bullock. I do know who pulled the wind regulations for further attention, and that was myself and a couple of the other planning commissioners that had worked on the solar regulations in the hopes that we would kind of update those and look at it with some new information. So, and my understanding, and see if staff can add to this, but I believe December 14th at the mid-month meeting, which is not an action meeting at all, is the first time that the Planning Commission will see the new staff draft of the regulations. And at that same time, we'll get to see it, the public can get to see it, and then planning staff or planning commissioners are planning to hold some kind of meetings out in Southwest Douglas County for getting information back and forth from people, as well as when it comes as an item to the Planning Commission, that will have a full public meeting too. Sarah, can you add to that at all?
The only thing I would add, Commissioner, is that I believe that those public sessions will be held in January. I don't think we have a date yet, but I would not anticipate that I don't have a date to share, but so that makes me think they're not happening in December.
That makes sense.
And obviously, as soon as we get those dates, we will add them to our website on for additional information and so for the public.
It's just, it's hugely confusing, I think, for the public that don't work on this all the time, like our planning staff do, our zoning and code staff, that this is for a data tower. It's a standalone. This is one topic. The regulations for wind energy is another step and another topic. And then a wind application, which planning staff has said we do not have yet, will be another full set of public process. So just kind of compartmentalizing like which step we are in and how people can be involved.
I have-
over there.
No, that's okay. I have one more question for staff. And I also will have this question for the applicant in a moment, but Carl, what's your understanding? What's the zoning and codes office understanding of the local land agents monitoring the site? What are do you have a flushed out definition of that, like frequency, or what does monitoring mean? And specifically, I asked that for the fact that there's a condition about alerting and informing us of any deaths of birds or bats. And so I'm just curious about details around that.
I don't have any definition for how frequent the
Okay.
site will be monitored. That would probably be better left to the applicant to
Okay.
answer.
Any other questions for staff at this time?
Not just yet.
Okay, well, with that, then we'll invite the applicant to come provide some comments and answer questions from commissioners before we open up public comment.
The applicant has a presentation as well, so I can
Okay.
hold up here.
Thanks, Carl.
Oh, you could sit there if you want to run it for him if you need to.
And so my name's Alan Anderson. I'm with the Polsinelli Law Firm. I'm a proud Douglas County resident and represent NextEra Energy. And so we'll have members of NextEra that are able to answer some of the technical questions. And so I'll be fairly brief because much of this has been stated here. And I kind of wanted to reiterate a couple things. One, that this is a hearing and a decision related to the meteorological tower, which is simply for the gathering of the data related to the wind conditions and some other items. This is not a hearing as it relates to either the wind regulations or a wind project itself. There is no application at this point and won't be for some time in that regard. So I kind of want to reiterate that. And so under the temporary business use that's permitted, it has a specific criteria that's looked at that staff, pretty thoroughly went through but it's related to the finding of public interest. And then part of that review, the intensity and duration of use, traffic generated, plans for sanitation, and then other public and health and safety issues that they have that may come up. And as you saw in some of the staff materials, there were a lot of other conditions, a lot of other issues they went into that were presented. So again, the criterion, I think what you'll find is the meteorological tower itself meets those conditions as it relates to this temporary business use very favorably. And that was obviously the recommendation of staff. There's just a couple items in the conditions. One is that it asks for staff to have access to the site within 24 hours. It's not that there's any issue with the access to the site. Obviously, if it's an emergency condition, that should be done with obviously at any time that's necessary. Otherwise, we using someone else's land have certain obligations to notify them and also give them notice. So we'd ask for that to be moved to something more like 72 hours, simply for us to also communicate as necessary with a private landowner. The second is if it was similar to the previous towers, a 3-year timeframe as opposed to the having to kind of come up for a review or some kind of extension period, that would also be a request, but understand that this can be different than the previous. As it relates to the other kind of some of the questions on meteorological towers themselves, similar to the other one that is in Douglas County. And there's actually, there's hundreds, I think. I don't know the number in the state. There's 43 operating wind projects. All of them had pre-project meteorological towers. Almost all of them have continued meteorological towers. So it's not a new item within the state or how it operates and behaves. So, and NextEra has 9 operating projects in the state. So working within that context of meteorological towers is not new there. As it comes to birds and bats and other things, They can speak specifically, and there were some questions related to that and how that's both handled, monitored, and then obviously negative conditions are prevented is something that the industry is in next year specifically is able to work with. And then they are subject to all other, laws, which would include any laws related to birds and bats. And so that would be part of it, and it's even referenced as part of the condition. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Filito to provide some specifics as to this.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is John Filito. I'm a project developer with NextEra Energy. My team is here today to help clarify any questions the commission has related to our temporary business use application. Like Alan stated before me, we have no plans to apply for a wind permit for a wind project at this time. This permit is simply to apply for one of the items that we use to determine project viability and collect more data in the area. So. Any questions?
Okay, is that the end of your presentation? Or is,
We can go through this very quickly. It's just a short slide deck here, talking specifically about the size and scope of what a Met Tower looks like. If we go 2 slides forward to slide 3, please. So just to get a visual idea of what the size of a Met Tower is pre and post assembly. Pre-assembly there, it fits on one wood pallet. As we state in our application, there will be no disruption to traffic flow during the day of assembly. It is not a very large piece of equipment. Post-assembly, it has a height of 60 meters or approximately 197 feet. And as I said, they're anchored with guy wires and metal stakes in the ground. There is no concrete foundation associated with this. There is no underground wiring associated with this. The tower is self-powered with a small solar panel. And to go to slide number 5, to address some wildlife concerns, we certainly understand that. As a part of the tower installation process, we attach bird diverters on all guy wires used as tower supports. These diverters incorporate motion, reflectivity, and very light glowing light to provide daytime and nighttime visibility. These devices have been shown in independent studies to prevent bird strikes and are recommended by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we apply these across the tower for all new Met Tower installations. And so that's the end of my presentation.
is there anybody else from your team that's presenting? Or are you open for questions now?
I'm open for questions now, and on Zoom also is our environmental lead. He can answer more specific environmental questions as well.
Okay, great. Perhaps this is a question for Alan Anderson, just to kind of piggyback off the last thing I asked of staff. Can you, and since you mentioned your concern about the condition of 24 hours notice, will you just help us understand the relationship between NextEra and the landowner in terms of how, what the company's responsibility is, and if there are any responsibilities of the landowner or potential liabilities for the landowner if there were to be anything harmful that occurred at the site?
As far as our leasing process goes, we're responsible for all maintenance and monitoring of the Met Tower site. There are no particular obligations on the landowner to maintain the site themselves. If they do see something coincidentally, they can certainly report it to us. Like I said, we have multiple land agents that work in the area and have a relationship with the landowner. So if there's anything that they see, they can report it to them. But as far as maintenance of the site, it is all on us to do.
The only thing I would add there, and it's also a condition here, is obviously proof of adequate insurance there.
Mhm.
That would be the backstop if there were something. Again, it's not a particularly, as you saw how little it is on the setup and taking down, that this is not an intensive process on that part, or neither would it be the other direction.
Real quick, just to piggyback off that, I presumably the landowner has full control and use of the rest of the land around it, right? Since it's
Absolutely.
a relatively small footprint, it's not like there's a large area around it that will be off limits.
Correct.
And then since you sort of touched on it, will you flesh out for us what the local land agents sort of frequency of monitoring or how NextEra defines what monitoring the site is? You know, how frequently is that happening? Is it only happening based on incidents being reported or concerns?
Sure. We like to consider our monitoring to be twofold. We also have remote data monitoring with our data collection team back in our offices. So if they were to see anything on their end that would show a lack of performance from the Met Tower or an issue of other sorts, data collected looks off, it drastically changed from prior days, they would certainly, they would report it to our maintenance team and we would get a crew out there to address it. Additionally, we do have land agents in the county, in the field. We do not have a set plan of visiting the tower specifically with the land agents, but as I said, they have a relationship with the landowner. They're in the area often, and if there is any incidents, the landowner would probably report it to them. But we do rely heavily on that remote data collection for seeing if there are any issues.
Go ahead, Commissioner Millie.
So the landowner has full access to the land while the tower is in place, and presumably the landowner can also grant access to the land, or do they need to get permission from NextEra to have a third party that has access to their land while the tower is operating?
No, we're certainly comfortable giving you the landowner's information, and the county will have free access to the land with permission of the private landowner to access the facility.
Because that was one of my thoughts with the 24 versus 72 hours is it's not that hard to get a hold of the landowner directly. It's maybe harder to go through the company and back to the landowner and then back to us. And that may be more the issue. But if it is possible within the leasing structure that the county could have access to on occasion, on not regularly or something, but to have access to the landowner to get permission on a shorter notice. And I'm thinking in terms of, I do very much appreciate the bird and bat diversion technology that's not been around, I don't think, very long. And so I'm glad to see that there are efforts made for that. I did room with 2 ornithologists whose weekend job was to go collect dead birds from underneath guy wires on towers. So that's something that I understand a little bit about. I'd never asked them for the data, to tell you the truth, but I'm glad that there's some process there. But I just wonder if there'd be an objection to having a third party, probably KU student or something, to go out and just take a look and see how those are working in terms of the bird and bat strikes.
Sure, we would have no objection to a member of the county or someone representing the county to access the facility with the consent of the landowner prior.
And I think if the county was going to do that, we'd want also to have notice of that and be able to participate, on that as well. So obviously we can shorten the time frame such, as long as the landowner, that's the concern, is that it's their land, we want to be sensitive there. But if that was going to take place, obviously we'd want to have notice of that as well.
I think that could work out. I did have a conversation with Dr. Roger Boyd, who is the person who put the letter in the packet about bird strikes specifically, and had a conversation with him about, in the packet, it had said there was some additional technology, and we got a little bit more information about it here. So glad to see that. In terms of, does that need to be monitored regularly or what time of year? And he felt that really spring migration was the main time, and after foggy nights was more the issue. And that not having the tower with a light on it was beneficial, which that actually surprised me. I thought the light would have been helpful for birds avoiding it, and that was not the case. So, so that would be probably just a few times in the spring under certain conditions to be able to kind of come out and have some independent eyes and see how that is happening.
Sure.
Commissioner Kelly, you got any questions? No? Okay, I've got another one. Why this spot? What made you choose this spot?
So the locations for setting a Met Tower is through desktop review that we perform remotely. This area in particular, we believe has good wind resource, and among other places in the county where we would consider placing one, this is just one of those. We think that the wind resource in that area is representative of the county and would be very good in determining the viability of a future wind project in the county.
And what's NextEra's projected timeline for, I mean, you're asking for a temporary business use for 5 years. Is that representative of how long you are going to survey this data to determine viability of a project, or do you have a timeline yet?
Potentially, we do require a minimum of 2 years of good data in the county prior to construction. It could take anywhere from 2 to 5 years, which is why we're applying for up to 5 years of use. But as far as timeline goes, we would need a minimum of 2 years of data before proceeding with anything.
Thank you. And then my last question is, I know in responses to the questions posed by staff that you described and, you know, sort of the mitigated risks specifically around birds and bats, and that otherwise there is generally not any known risk to these types of towers. Will you just reiterate based on, I'm assuming Nextera has been responsible for installing and monitoring a large number of these over time. What might a worst case scenario look like? What I'm thinking about extreme weather events in particular and the increase of that and with the climate crisis, and what is a potential worst case scenario? And has that been discussed with staff about what your response would be in the event of a major weather event or something else that I'm not aware of?
With regard to wildlife?
No, not wildlife specifically, just the tower itself, you know, and I understand that it's secured to the ground but I mean, and maybe there have never been incidents of it being knocked down or had wires severed in any, you know, I'm just kind of thinking of all potential hypotheticals. I think about worst case
Absolutely.
scenarios a lot.
So I can't speak personally to any knowledge of incidents involving towers being blown over, or falling over, or issues with that. Most of that due diligence occurs in the siting process. Per the diagram that we submitted to the commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission prior to the meeting, we site these towers far away from all residences, all roads, in order to make sure that there wouldn't be any issue, even in the case of a significant weather emergency, that there would be no issue with people or encountering roads or something like that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions from commissioners?
Always, but I try and keep it in check.
Go ahead.
So do the data towers, the Met towers, stay up after a wind project is being installed? Is that something that stays, or is that it is finished with its life cycle and then it's a separate process?
It has its own life cycle. So when we have determined that we've collected enough data in the area and construction begins, we will disassemble the tower and return the land underneath to its original state, which, as we stated prior, would be minimal impacts to begin with.
Can I just jump in there a little bit, Commissioner Lake? That feels a little contradictory to what I think I heard from Mr. Anderson before about how there are many of them still in existence.
Yeah, so often then there's kind of two, this has a life cycle. This is the pre-construction Met Tower. Then along with a wind project, they will often have a Met Tower. Interestingly, I'm not sure exactly the reason for that, but there'll be Met Towers often in a project to continue to measure whether I think the turbines are behaving as expected from a Met Tower. So that could have a separate Met Tower involved with that, and that may be related to how a turbine layout would be. So that's a separate set, but there would be often within a project Met Towers, but that's again different. This one has a life cycle, and those would have a separate.
I don't have any other questions. If you do, take it away.
I probably will after we hear public comment.
Okay, got it. Double check with you, see if any other questions come up. Okay, let's open this up for public comment. I don't know that there was an opportunity to do a sign up sheet, which is okay. There's a lot of people. So we're just gonna do this by whoever wants to volunteer to stand up first and come provide public comment. A reminder that each person will have 3 minutes, and we ask that you state your name and Douglas County residence for the meeting minutes, please. So would anybody like to provide public comment first? Okay.
Hi, my name is Travis Hardy. I live out in the county, 421 East 2400 Road. And, you know, one of the things I just like to touch on to start with, you know, it sounds like there was notification for the folks that live out by the tower and stuff. I think a lot of the folks out here, though, kind of got caught by surprise on some of this. You know, as mentioned about a website. I mean, I didn't know about the website. I do now. It's good to know. You know, I was looking out on the county commissioners, you know, agenda page. You know, it was like about probably a week or so before the agenda was put out there for the meeting. Obviously, we got a lot of interest in this. Just moving forward, one thing is that there's some way, somewhere to post that somewhere that everybody, you know, has a little more time to kind of know about it so they can, you know, come and speak if they want to. You know, and that website that was mentioned, one thing I did notice, because I looked at it last night, we got a link to it late. If that's supposed to be the one area that's kind of supposed to be, you know, where everybody's supposed to go to, which is fine. I did notice that that December 14th meeting is not listed on that website, which is just a study session, you know, which I know we don't, you know, go to, but it'd be nice, anything related to this, I think, you know, if it's going to be, if that website is the one, you know, point of, you know, we want to look at, just make sure everything's out there. The other thing that kind of caught some of us by surprise is, you know, it's kind of already brought up, is this is a temporary business permit versus going through the planning commission. You know, I'm a little confused. I'm still a little confused. I mean, I got some clarification earlier, but, you know, what does temporary stand for? I mean, we're talking about 5 years. I mean, in my head, when I think about temporary and, you know, maybe what it was meant to be originally was, you know, I'm going to put up a tent for fireworks or something like that. To me, 5 years is not necessarily temporary. I mean, it's not permanent, but it's temporary, something like that. And so that's where we were a little confused. You know, we assumed something like this would go through the planning commission, but due to the, you know, different type of permit, it wasn't. One thing that was mentioned also is, and they mentioned a land agent, and I guess just for my own benefit, it'd be interesting to know what exactly is considered a land agent that's going to kind of come out here and look at this stuff. I mean, is it just like literally a regular person driving around, or, you know, are they certified in something? It'd just be interesting to get clarification on that. And there was mention about remote monitoring, and I was just kind of curious, you know, is there any sort of cameras with that? They're gonna, you know, would be pointing offsite or not. The other thing that was mentioned was the tower, you know, the height of it. One thing I was curious about on the height is, you know, it's coming in right underneath that where you have to have the light on it. Wind turbines are about 500 foot. So I was just kind of curious, you know, why is that height chose versus, you know, 500 foot, you know, or could it be shorter? You know, I was just kind of curious why exactly they went with that. And in closing, just one thing on the height, you know, once it gets up, is someone going to actually measure it? Or I don't know how you would do that, but, you know, can someone verify that that height is, you know, low enough so that planes don't have issues? Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Forth. I live at 498 North 100 Road, Overbrook. And I've heard a couple of things tonight to give me a little bit concerned. Nextera is in charge of monitoring bird strikes. In Oklahoma, Nextera was fined $8 million for not reporting eagle strikes. So you got the fox watching the hen house. I don't see that as a good solution for our county. All the information that they get out of this tower is readily available. If you're a pilot, you can get winds aloft, you get all these weather information from the FAA, NOAA, all these different things. So this is not something that is particular to this tower. They talk about wind variabilities. That's all available out there with a click of a button. And that's pretty much all I have to say right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Justin Hawkins, 127 East 900 Road, south of Warden there. Thank you very much, commissioners, for allowing public comment on this issue. To start with, I would request a moratorium be placed on any wind energy system development or related projects until there has been opportunity for the Douglas County Zoning and Codes or Lawrence Douglas County Planning and Development Services to consider public input. Out of respect for the time of everyone here tonight, this evening, I'm going to keep my comments brief and focused on the MET. We recognize that this meeting is not necessarily a proper forum for discussing a lot of the issues with wind energy systems, and there are many. The current proposal for a temporary business use permit for the meteorological evaluation tower in itself is not of significant environmental impact, as noted in the report. It is also clearly identified as one of the first steps in a wind farm project, which would have, in our opinion, detrimental environmental impacts on Douglas County. For many reasons, commercial wind energy systems are not appropriate for the county as populated as Douglas. I'll keep, again, focused on the METs. They are currently not a permitted use in the zoning district of Douglas County, as noted in the report. And I would request that they continue not to be permitted even under a temporary permit. Only after the county commission and other Douglas County staff have had opportunity to hear general public input, including those from rural residents potentially impacted by any commercial wind energy system projects, should the county commission consider approval of any request from developers seeking to take steps toward establishing commercial wind energy systems. The memorandum submitted is recommending a 1-year temporary permit with the option to renew. Yet it's very clear that it's for a 5-year purpose. I would be concerned that if a temporary permit were approved, that NextEra would drag their feet on dismantling after the period if the permit were not to be renewed. In summary, we're requesting the county to not consider or approve any steps toward development of any commercial wind farms in Douglas County until public input can be provided. This would include any temporary business use permits related to commercial wind energy projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is William Burks. My wife and Becky own 140 acres directly south of the proposed tower. I would have to say that I have spent more time near that tower than anyone else in America. I'm out there all the time. I train retrievers. Bob Dylan once said, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. I don't need to know which way the wind blows out there. It blows all the time. There will be plenty of wind. I've had 50 people I've had out there say, boy, it's a windy place. So what I think this is a different way that you have to know which way the wind blows. We're all going to be back here sometime with not such a little innocuous tower. We're going to be out here talking about a huge project that will affect the integrity of the Santa Fe Trail, that will affect the aesthetic value of Southwest Douglas County, and will affect the hopes and dreams of many small landowners. I hope that you are not pressured by NextEra, which, despite their rhetoric of being a friendly to the environment green company, are in effect a huge corporation trying to make a profit off of the people of Southwest Douglas County. Someone had mentioned this, they weren't aware of meetings. NextEra approached people selectively. That person wasn't contacted because I'm sure he has small land. I have many friends who have large properties out there. They were all more than contacted. They were wooed. And there's a plan. There's a method to their plan. They've done it over and over and over. They're good at it. I hope you guys look at this critically and don't destroy. There are 8 ponds on my property. It has a very Flint Hills-like look, obviously not the Flint Hills. It just gives me a sickened feeling thinking about having those monstrosities out there. Thank you.
William, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name.
Burks, B-U-R-K-S.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Jordan Olson. I'm a resident of Southwest Douglas County, south of the town of Warden, big city. I moved to Douglas County to attend Baker University in 2004. While I was there, I studied wildlife biology with a focus in upland birds. I graduated in 2009, and I've continued my studies on my personal level and have continually helped many Douglas County landowners, especially in my neighborhood, to modify and manage their ground to attract and hold wildlife of all different sorts. I currently am a partial owner in an ag retail business where I work with agricultural producers across several eastern counties, especially Douglas and Franklin, some in Osage. I've also been a member of the Douglas County Soil and Water Conservation District for nearing 9 years, chairman of the board, several of those. I'm also, as anyone knows me very well, a very avid hunter and trapper. So I say all of this to say, you could say I'm very genuinely interested and often consumed with the health of the rangelands, the crops, the wildlife, and the soils in this county. My concern with this energy project centers around the negative effects of the wind turbines, transmission lines, and Met towers. In relation to local wildlife populations and also the rangeland habitat in the area. As a biologist, I like to use science to base my opinions, and I've looked at research from multiple sources, including the USGS, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, Journal of Wildlife Management, Quail Forever, and the list goes on. From a wildlife and native rangelands perspective, I found many reasons to avoid wind turbines, transmission lines, and also the Met towers. My 3 largest reservations would include, but may not be limited to, increased displacement of wildlife due to direct and also indirect habitat loss from these structures, decreased survival and reproductive successes amongst multiple wildlife species, including game animals, songbirds, mammals. We have 2 endangered reptile species in this county, as well as 4 endangered bird species present in our county. And the third would be permanent destruction of rangelands from their site. Obviously, this Met tower wouldn't do much, but the pending towers could. In closing, I moved to rural Baldwin City to enjoy an unparalleled mix of diversity on the landscape. Douglas County offers amazing historical prairie landscapes, Santa Fe trail ruts, woodlands, agriculture, wildlife, small towns, and a small city. Adding wind turbines, transmission lines, and Met towers would most assuredly devalue our splendor of our landscapes, negatively fragment wildlife habitat, and reduce the allure to enjoy Douglas County diversity as I have come to know and call home for the last 18 years. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to provide public comment? Please come forward.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Carl Peter John. I'm a Douglas County property owner on Woodring Road, 500 North, 200 Road, southwest part of the county, roughly described southwest of Globe and just south, about a mile south of 56 Highway. Our property is a farm, a family, it's historically been a family farm. I want to express my strong support from the people who've testified in terms of Mike Forth and Justin Hawkins. I won't repeat their testimony, but I do want to urge you to clarify between temporary, because when you have a 5-year agreement with the ability to extend, that looks permanent to me. And I think the presentation you've had is incomplete. I want to make a point that you haven't heard and discussed, and I think should have, because this tower with the guide wires that are needing, you've got a much larger square footage. I don't know if we're talking like a 1/4 of an acre, 1/3 of an acre, 1/2 an acre. And if this is really for 5 years, you're looking at permanent. And I emphasize permanent because we need to have an appraisal in here in terms of valuation. And with this tower and the surrounding area, now whether it's an easement or if it's an actual allocation, should be commercial or possibly utility property, since Nectera is basically a utility operation. And of course, as you all know, the appraised value structure in Kansas and the assessment ratios are very different between utility property, commercial property, and ag property. And until that's clarified, I think you've got an incomplete presentation here. And I don't think you should proceed until those points are clarified. And we're looking at part of the Douglas County tax base, and in these challenging economic times, if you've got utility property that's not being properly assessed, and they're looking at basically saying, hey, wait a minute, we're going to have our cake and eat it too, because it's temporary, but it's for 5 years plus extensions. I think a clarification is in order. I very much appreciate the opportunity to testify here, and I would stand for any questions. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Wayne Zachary, live at 557 North 600 Road. Get a perspective on that. That's the opposite corner from the Washington Creek Church. I'm certainly not opposed to alternative forms of energy. In fact, I'm currently researching the potential for putting solar at my home. What I've discovered in that pursuit is, at this point, I don't consider it a viable option. The cost versus the return on my investment seems too far out there and frankly, too uncertain. When I traveled to my sons in El Dorado on Thanksgiving Day, down I-35, I noticed that the wind farm at Waverly and the wind farm at what I'd call Lebo Emporia area, all of those wind turbines were idle. Caused me to wonder what's producing the electricity. When I came home that evening, obviously I couldn't see the turbines turning, but I could see the lights flashing from miles and miles away. So they had to be getting their juice from somewhere. Where, I'm not sure. So back to the, I wonder if the tower that is being constructed for meteorological purposes, what data that is going to gather and how that data will be disseminated. Will it be private? Will it be public? Perhaps that's already been discussed and I'm being redundant, but some of the comments were difficult to understand and hear. And how will we know if it's truly viable to consider wind farms in Southwest Douglas County? I would request that information at least be made public if it's not going to be already. And secondly, based on what I saw on Thanksgiving Day, I would question the viability with or without a tower. I don't think it takes any rocket scientist that lives in the area to know that our wind is sometimes strong out there and sometimes it's not at all. And my research has told me that a wind turbine needs an average of 23 miles an hour sustained most of the year to be viable. And that would be my concern and question about any wind turbines in Southwest Douglas County. Thank you, Commissioners.
My name is Marcia Pohl and I live south of Warden. My address is 146 East 900 Road. And I am asking you to place a moratorium on this temporary use permit. The county has not had any public hearings yet for the new regulations of the wind energy, and these regulations are still in the planning stage. The character of our rural land, our home, will change with wind turbines and transmission lines. My husband is the 5th generation of Poles in our area. Our children and grandchildren are the 6th and 7th generations living here. The landscape, the peace, the tranquility will all be affected by wind turbines and transmission lines. The landscape disturbed, habitat changes for affected by wind turbines and transmission lines. The landscape, okay, I'll get on the right line in a minute. The landscape disturbed, habitats change for wildlife and domestic animals. Our view of the land will change. Peace of the rural area will no longer be peaceful. Constant sound from the turbines and blinking lights are bothersome to man and animal. The building and the maintenance of these structures will invade our privacy. My father-in-law, Orville Pohl, said the family was pleased to pass the land from one generation to the next, always working to improve the land so they could pass it on better than when it was passed to them. There has been improvement on the land over the years and improved grasses, waterways, terraces, diversions, ponds, improvements on the land. When construction of the wind turbines and substations and transfer lines start up, these conservation improvements will be disturbed. Will the next era fix these improvements back to meet the Natural Resources Conservation Service specifications? Federal and county money was used to build these conservation structures. So federal and county inspections should be made and signed off on before next era will move on to the next place. Plus, the landowner should have input regarding the repairs. I just, again, want to say that I would like to see a moratorium put on this because we have not went over the regulations with you. And I think we should be able to, before you put the cart before the horse, letting them in to put up the very first step in what would eventually or could go to wind energy. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Nolan Packard. I live in Southwest Douglas County. This CUP for this Met Tower is the foot in the door. My wife and I looked at several different houses and properties within and outside of Douglas County. My realtor called me to say that there's a house not yet on the market. We could view it the next day. Upon viewing the house, the layout of the land, the realtor eagerly pointed out the view from the back patio, mentioned watching the sunsets, and then took us around to the covered porch on the front side of the house and discussed the sunrises. Within minutes, my wife and I fell in love with these views and purchased our forever home in Douglas County. My visual impact, along with other present and future Douglas County residences, may be in peril. It is my understanding that the setbacks of a tower can be at 1,500 feet from a residential structure, or 110% of the height of the tower plus the length of the blade. I would ask, is this setback enough? I surely do not want to sit on my porch to look at a sunrise or sunset with a wind turbine approximately 1,500 feet from my house. The setback maybe have alternate effects as well. If landowner A contracts to have a wind turbine installed on their property and landowner B, the setback crosses the property line, landowner B could be impacted on what they can and cannot build on their property. The other more negative effects is shadowing. It is well documented that wind turbines cause shadowing effects. How many Douglas County residents will be affected by this? Douglas County imposed a moratorium in the past to gather information and update zoning regulations. I'd be curious how many residences were contacted during that time. I respectfully request that this commission enact a second moratorium to gather information, listen to testimonies, and contact Douglas County public input. Again, I would respectfully request multiple meetings from the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Board and this commission before any decisions or CUPs are granted. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Tim Horn. I live down on North 100 Road in Douglas County. I'm also the Willow Springs Township trustee. And my concerns are for our general road maintenance, the cost of what it's going to take for us to keep our roads. You get a good rain, a freeze, a thaw, with the heavy equipment going in and out, it's going to take a big impact on us. And I know it's said that they will take care of the roads and everything, but what's the impact a year after they leave, you know, on some of our older bridges, things like that. So we really need to consider the full impact of what this could come down to down the road. I don't know about Merriam County, which is probably going to have a bigger impact than us. But financially, we don't have a lot of extra money that we want to put toward what we've got fabulous roads right now. We've got a great man running our grader. He does a fabulous job. We got some of the best roads in the county, in our township of Willow Springs. We're pretty proud of that. And we want to maintain that and everything. So appreciate your time. And we just want to look at the future, not just at the present thing that they're requesting. And thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to provide public comment? Okay. All right, thank you. Go ahead and line up if you want.
Good evening. My name is Heather Price, and I understand that this may be kind of a precursor to wind turbines coming here. But I also think, as many have already said, we need to be knowledgeable about looking at the impact of what opening this door, of letting a tower that we know is potentially building a wind turbine farm to us. So I'm sharing my husband's experience. He has 25 years of construction experience, specifically 10 years in bridges and wind turbines. And he can tell you that once the wind turbines begin to come with the starting of this tower, you can expect at least 2 cranes to be brought in to the site, up to 25 semi-loads bringing crane parts as additional semis come hauling the actual turbines. I know that again is not in reference to the particular tower that is being spoken of right now, but I'm a forward future thinker, and I know that is a concern. So there would be a lot of wear and tear and hazards to our roads that we need to be aware of. We know that these trucks bringing them are usually overweight, over length, the weight and magnitude of what that would do for our roads and road closures, as well as just the nastiness it would bring with mud being drug out on the road. So although I appreciate learning that this is maybe the first step and we're considering the tower, I also am very aware of what that can bring. And I ask that my commissioners listen to the representation here from the people and do not allow this motion to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for letting us come speak tonight. We appreciate the opportunity. My name is Lori Shuck. I live at 466 North 100 Road. And according to our representative in the wind energy business in our area, I'm a problem. So I probably will continue to be a problem, but I've lived there. I was brought home to the house I live in. It was my great-grandfather's. It was built the spring after Little Bighorn. So we're not real good with progress. I have nothing against alternative energy. I feel like we're too highly a populated area. And if we put up this test tower, we're opening the door, basically getting into bed with this company. I think you should all Google the company reputation, how many lawsuits have been filed. I think we should maybe take a lesson from Osage County, who banned them. And I was at those meetings. And basically it was because they didn't feel confident that NextEra would produce what they said they would. They couldn't get any verification. Promises were what they got. So I think they put a lot of study into it. And by doing this tower, we open the door, because once they get their foot in the door, they're going to sit in your couch and play with your remote. It's an aggressive company. There's no doubt. I hope we can do a moratorium and that maybe you let the public have a few more comments. Somebody used my best lines. I don't believe, I was told by the rep that they would pack the room with people from Lawrence that are in favor of energy. That's fine and dandy, but this does not affect the people in Lawrence. It affects rural Douglas County. They won't get the energy, so they get no profit from it. And they don't have to suffer the imposition in their area that we will have to. I think this is a rural subject matter. So I really believe when it get down to it, should be checking driver's license at the door and make sure this is somebody that's going to be affected. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And I know you have some hard decisions to make.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners, for your time. My name is Connie Flory. I live south of Lawrence. A lot of the things that I had on my notes have been discussed, but I have a few things that I want you to use discernment with. I don't know how many of you live in the county or how many of you wish that you lived in the county, but I think you see that you have a real good cross-section of people behind me. And the fact that we don't really want to see a wind tower messing up our scenery. I hope you really use that as discernment, because just imagine if you had the city put a big street light out in front of your house that you have to deal with every night. Now, not counting the noise and the reflection that we would have. Also, I did a short dive into why Germany is so scared of freezing to death when they were the lead country in Europe with wind energy and with solar energy. And they are now in the process of tearing down their wind energy and going back to coal. Just something you might want to do a short dive on. Also, the county has always prided itself in wanting a lot of permits to make sure that nobody just throws something up. We can't even start a farm without having permission. You're going to put these wind towers, or they're asking to put these wind towers up with a lot of concrete in the ground. Where's the water going to come from that's going to settle this concrete in the ground? We're in a drought now. Which one of us wants to give up any water that we might have underground so that they can pour concrete? What happens to that concrete when they decide to leave or they tear that tower down? I don't think they pay to take it out. What happens to that tower when it quits running or it warps because it stopped and it hasn't been running? What happens to that? Who pays to take that out? Or does it just stand there as an eyesore? So please, commissioners, please use your discernment on making this decision, because you have a big cross-section here behind me, and this is just one meeting. So I think it's pretty apparent that Douglas County doesn't want these wind energies, because we're really, as far as I know, we're not getting the energy from it. It's going elsewhere, but you're tearing up our county for it. So thank you for your time.
Hello, commissioners. My name is Carrie Barth. I'm a resident of Douglas County, living about 1.5 miles south of 56 Highway. I'm requesting either a vote for no or a minimum of an 18-month moratorium for both wind and solar for the county commissioners, planning and zoning. We just don't know what we don't know. And this is not something you want to rush. The county needs time to thoroughly research all the hazards and risks versus benefits and the cost ROI analysis of such a large and complex project that affects so many acres of our county and so many people. It's going to have long-lasting effects on our county's legacy, as these wind and solar contracts are written in 70 to 90-year terms. The request from NextEra for the Met Tower or the Met Test Tower is really the doorway to the industrial wind turbines in our area. NextEra is a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company. I did a simple Google search just on NextEra, and there are pages and pages of lawsuits for all kinds of reasons. Research needs to be done. The money NextEra will offer the county and the homeowners is just really not worth a mistake that could negatively impact generations to come. I went to the proposed test site. I was surprised how many houses, farmsteads, animals, and even church that I could see from the hilltop site. So you do need to check that height because it is higher than any other part of that county there. They will all have a view of the test tower. And it is actually closer than 1.5 miles to the Santa Fe Trail. So I'm very concerned about our history there as well. It is paramount that you put into place this 18-month moratorium on wind and solar to have time to proper research, investigating other counties, states, countries, researching what these turbines are made of, what the validity or non-validity of wind is here in Kansas, which actually there's a ton of information. You should reach out to Senator Mike Thompson, retired 40-year meteorologist right here in the state of Kansas. And he is an expert in this area. Most of this is out there as well. A lot of these things some people have said, so I'm gonna move on to some of the others. One of the big concerns I have is how is it going to affect the well water in our area? We're rural. I have well water. We all have a lot of us have well water. The size of these vibrations at these towers, how is that going to hurt our health? Now onto my personal story. My husband and I have already dealt with an energy company coming in and placing an electrical substation next to our house. When it came time for us to sell, we lost thousands of dollars. The energy company told us, guess what? It's not going to hurt our property value. We knew they were lying. Are you going to accept the wind company's numbers as 100% accurate as a gospel when they stand to make millions and they've already lied to folks about these contracts, as we've already heard? We searched for our land for over 5 years to find it in rural Douglas County, coming from Baldwin City town. And we built our dream house on that where we plan to stay. Please make the determination tonight to put this moratorium in place. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Philip Metzger. I live at 796 North 600 Road. That's about 3 miles south of the town of Lone Star. This proposed tower site is almost just straight west of my house. If they build wind towers there, they'll be right in our site. If you could sit on the patio with my wife, watching a sunset, and have her explain the sunset, you would understand why she doesn't want anything in her view. My family has been in this county since 1858. That's before Kansas was even a state. And to have something rape landscape like these towers do is just ridiculous. I'm a district sales manager for a seed corn company. I travel all of eastern Kansas and western Missouri. I go in a lot of areas where these wind towers are, and the farmers in those areas wish they'd never heard of a wind tower. After a while, they start spewing oil all over the farmland. They kill many birds. There's ice that comes off of them and flies through the air when the ice freezes on them. There's just many problems. And I have a dealer at just west of Pittsburgh, Kansas, that said that, well, he's got one just, immediately east of him. And he says the oil it's unbelievable how much oil runs out of them after a while. And then the generators on top of them, if they last a year, it's something else. It's wonder they last that long. But down at Moran, Kansas, and another area ago, there's the blades on them are stacked up like mountains, and there's nothing you can do with them. The landfills won't take them. They're burying them right now in Wyoming. And, that's really a smart way to do it. So I want to thank you for your time, and thank you very much.
Is there anybody else who wishes to provide public comment? Okay, seeing no other hands or folks standing, we'll double check if anybody online has indicated that they would like to provide public comment.
Don't have any raised hands online.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. All right, with that, we'll close public comment and bring this back for further discussion amongst commissioners. Would we like to give the applicants and staff an opportunity to answer any direct questions, or curious about thoughts from other commissioners?
So typically on a planning item, that is what we do. We ask the applicant if they have any response to some of the comments that were made by the public. So that would be appropriate, even though it's a temporary business.
I appreciate that. Okay, thank you. All right, well, we'll invite the applicants to come up to the podium and I'm sure that there are some questions or concerns that were mentioned in public comment that you may wish to address. So now's your opportunity.
We have no further comment with regard to anything brought up related to wind energy systems or a potential project in the future. I'd be willing to answer any comments that you might have thought of related to our meteorological tower application only. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions that you want to direct to the applicant based on comments that we heard?
Not at the moment, I will. But I have lots of other things to talk about.
Okay.
When you're ready.
Okay. Well, if you want to go ahead and take a seat and I'll call you back up if we have further questions. Go ahead, Commissioner Lee.
So I know we've talked about that, tonight's discussion is about the Met Tower and the Met Tower only, but I have been taking notes on not only everybody's comments, but also kind of topics that need to be talked about with the regulation discussion, which will start probably January timeframe, just to kind of flag those, and that this does then become part of the public comment to start that process too. So I have quite a list. I just want to say that I'm listening and I hear these wildlife, lights, energy inputs and outputs, the construction of the structures, setbacks, neighbors, flicker and shadows, roads and bridges, traffic, concrete, and who takes the concrete out, what are the remediation, who takes the towers down, leases, well water, potential oil spills, birds, ice, and recycling of the blades. So those are just kind of some general topics that I think we'll expect to hear more from the public, but also conversations with all of the steps of the process. So the planning staff, the planning commission, and then our staff, and then our county commission. And if you'll allow me to give, I don't normally push in quite this much, but I think it's worth pointing out that this is my neighborhood too. I know very many of you, by name, by sight, and by just, we've known each other a long time. So our farm was also approached by NextEra for the 8 years ago for a potential, I think it was signing it for an option. We did not. We were approached this time to sign, we did not. And that's not that I have judged this project, the project that we may not see for many years. It's that I wanted to be able to speak into this process without saying, that I took money from anybody. So I wanted you to know that this is my viewscape too. I mean, this is my home too. And for many of you, I've been in the neighborhood quite a bit longer than some of you. My family's been in Douglas County since 1857. So I've even got Phil Metzger beat. So I just, this topic will be front and center for us for a long time. It's not going to go to bed tonight. So just be prepared that this is something that we will need your voice for, we'll need our voices for. There's just a lot of discussion yet to come. So don't wear out. We'll still need you in that. As part of my homework that I've been doing about this is I've been in contact with Bourbon County, with some of their county staff, including the road and bridge guy, to talk about what their impacts were, how they felt about it, how the people felt about it, how the county felt, how the legal documents were written, and do people feel like they were getting adequately compensated? There's just a lot of conversations that I've started having, and it's just the beginning. There is a lot of work that we will do, and we also expect that there'll be a lot of work that you'll do as we educate ourselves and educate each other. To come back to, so that's all kind of conversation about wind energy that may or may not impact tonight's discussion about the Met Tower. But I would also say that the Met Tower specifically is located on land that in grad school, as a soil scientist, I did the soil mapping for the 4 square miles to the south and southeast of that location. So I've walked every bit of it. I know it very well. So this is not something that is, far away to me. Certainly, it's we do know the area. I spent a lot of time there. So thank you for letting me kind of put some of that out there.
Sure. Did you, I think now is the best time to pose any questions if you have them for the applicant, and make sure that we've got clarity on anything that might have been brought up that we want to ask for further information about before we sort of deliberate on this issue. So I think Commissioner Willie, it sounds like you've got some questions. One question that I have for you all at NextEra is, and maybe this is a question for staff to give some input to also, is to sort of discuss that issue of taxation around the use of it, and the point that, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna not waste time looking through my notes to look for the name of the gentleman who brought up sort of the issues of how the land is zoned and the difference between how zoned land is taxed, whether it's agricultural, commercial, industrial. So I just wonder if NextEra can speak to that a little bit, and if staff has any input, I'd like to hear that also. And maybe you can speak about the difference between this temporary business use and if a future wind project were to be proposed, what it might look like in that situation, since you would not be the landowner. And presumably the land would still be zoned agricultural, is that, I assume, the expectation and assumption of NextEra.
Yeah, and again, there's 43 projects, just, for history on that. So there's a lot of experience on this. I mentioned one in Bourbon County. There's one in construction now in Republic and Washington County. One before that, the most recent one before that's in Marshall County. So a lot of people to talk to on those things. I think that's great, because I think that'll show how it works. And so many of these concerns that are mentioned are covered within the process, covered within the document, so that roads, all those things are covered. Taxation is also one of those. And you should have an experience specific as to the previous wind tower. If it was altered, what'll happen traditionally with say a wind turbine, it doesn't require a zoning change. So it's done on agricultural land through the conditional use permit process. Is the traditional way in a zone county. In an unzoned county, there's obviously not a zoning process. So it's done through just entering into agreements with the county. As it relates to assessment of a property, that's a slightly different thing. So it doesn't change the zoning classification. But in the case of a wind turbine, the place where the infrastructure is, it goes from agricultural to commercial as it relates to the real property taxation. So it's an increase in the taxation as it relates to the location where the turbine is. Obviously, agricultural is our lowest classification essentially, and so that's it possible, if that's how they deem where the meteorological tower is, it could have a different classification as to the specific location where the asset is, not the whole property. So it's not a zoning change, but it could have an assessment difference. And in the case of a wind project, about an acre turns into commercial property. So there is an increase in real property tax. Then there is a personal property tax issue too. So there could be an increase with a wind project. There's a 10-year exemption, just like every other energy generation system. And then there's a personal property tax increase too. So that there would potentially be a personal property increase too. So there won't be a decrease. There will possibly be an increase in the property tax. And then as you relate to did that cover also the wind project going forward as well?
I think so. I think you answered my question around that. And then the other thing I wanted to address is we heard lots of comments questioning sort of the definition of temporary. And I think that in part that's a question for staff to consider. But one, I want to make a comment, which is that, by comparison, many of our conditional use permits, as opposed to temporary business use permits, are some of those timeframes are 20 years, 30 years. There are some that are 10 years. Many of them have regular and incremental evaluations of the conditional use and assessments from staff. So it's not just 10, 20, 30 years with sort of no monitoring. But so a temporary business use for up to 5 years it is just by comparison, more temporary in nature. I appreciate staff's recommendation that it is rather than 5 years, that it should be approved on an annual basis and reassessed. But the other part of that question, I think that I heard some concern about was if there were to be this Met Tower there for up to 5 years, a maximum of 5 years, what is, you mentioned earlier that there's a life cycle to this. So what does decommissioning it look like? What does deconstructing it, removing it, restoring the land look like, and how, so once you've gathered, you mentioned a minimum of 2 years of data before sort of determining the potential viability of a project and submitting that. If you were to collect data for all 5 years and that temporary business use permit were to expire, what are your next steps? And then my question to staff about that also is, do we have that written in? And maybe I just overlooked that. Kind of what does it look like for the end of the TBU if it were to be issued?
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Polito talk specifically about that process. And again, you saw it comes in a container, it's put up in a day. It's not an extensive construction process going up. You can imagine it's similar coming down. But I guess as it relates to the end, there is an end. So the permit approval would have it has its time frame. And so at that point, it would have to come down. So we don't have the right, there's some alluded to that somehow we can continue on beyond that. It's just like any other permit you grant at the end of that time period, it must cease. And at that point, we'd have the same obligation to do that. Just like, when you approve anything else at the end of that term, it is required to come down. And then in the sense of when you think about land use, it is a temporary use. And in fact, the conditional use permit, when it has a time frame, can be a long temporary use, but it is still a temporary use as well. So those that have a time frame are actually, by their nature, a temporary, meaning it's not allowed infinitum. So it's not something that goes on permanent. So just as you relate to the language of the permanent land use perspective, a 3 and 5 year timeframe is actually very much a temporary use. And then even when you get to the conditional use permit, those are just long-term temporary uses because they do have a timeframe which they must also come down or, obviously reapproach a county too. But I'll let Mr. Polito speak specific.
Absolutely. As far as the decommissioning process, it's very similar to what the assembly or commissioning process would look like. The timeframe would be same, the equipment used would be same. The tower would be disassembled within a day as well.
Go ahead, Commissioner Kelly.
I have a question for staff. Was this application moved to a temporary business use by the applicant or by staff?
A meteorological evaluation tower isn't on our list of permitted uses within the zoning code and therefore has to be approved as a temporary business use. Temporary business uses allow for a wide variety of different uses, not just those that are in the permitted use table.
So my question again is was it staff that said we should use a temporary business use? Is that it?
That's correct.
And is that because the CUPs that we've used in the past, we weren't zoned in 2014, correct? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Willie, go ahead with your questions.
How did you know? So in terms of just the planning process, I've been fairly familiar with that, and this isn't really a direct question, just that when we talk in planning, like 20 years is a pretty short period of time. Like much of what we do if we're changing the zoning or something like that is a 100-year or a forever kind of impact. And so this being temporary in terms of whether it's 1 year or 5 does definitely for me fall very much under, this is a temporary use, and then it goes back when that is done. We did have a question from Mr. Hardy that I think you can answer about the land agents. Who are they? What do they do? What's their role there? Can you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. Some land agents are contracted with NextEra. Some are direct employees of NextEra. They are people who live in the state of Kansas or live nearby to a site where we're prospecting a potential project. They're the ones that make relationships with the landowners and discuss potential projects in the future with them.
And I know there was also a concern, I guess, Mr. Forth, that had about having outside eyes or third-party eyes on, especially about the bird strikes or just other, and I think we had talked about that earlier in the meeting about whether that would be acceptable to have county staff or KU grad student or, somebody that would be willing to kind of come in and put some additional eyes on that. And you didn't have any difficulties with that, is that correct?
No objection to that, as long as it's somebody who is either a representative of the county or appointed by the county, and along with notification to the landowner, we would also be notified.
So that is a condition we could put onto this temporary business permit, temporary business use, and you'd accept that?
Yes.
Okay. Sarah, are you willing to talk a little bit about, we heard a little bit from John Bullock about moratoriums and their use and what they can be used for, what they can't be used for. And I know the previous one, it sounds like, was about 6 months. So we heard a lot about moratoriums, and that's more to do with a potential wind project. I want to make sure we kind of stay talking more about the Met Tower, but do you have anything you want to add about that tool, as whether that is available to us or not available to us?
Well, county council is still online, and he can answer this better than I can, but my understanding is we do not have the ability to issue a moratorium on either Met Towers nor wind projects permanently. But John, please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, the key, Sarah, to what you said is permanently. The moratorium is temporary, not to overuse the word temporary tonight, but I'm not aware of any specific duration that's been specified in the case law for how long a moratorium can last, but the intent is that it be imposed for a limited period of time to allow the government to assess what you may want to do in terms of regulation. If it becomes in effect a perpetual prohibition on doing the activity, then you have to go through the zoning process to actually prohibit it. You can't do that by virtue of a moratorium. So, I don't want to go beyond the scope of the question, but if the question is, could you do a moratorium with respect to wind farms or Met Towers, the answer is yes, you could. But it would need to be adopted by a resolution, and it would need to have a specified duration in order to be legally viable.
Thank you. Reading between the lines that we've got, if this is the first company to ask for a Met Tower, not counting the one from 2014, which is now gone, was disassembled, and you can't tell where it was. Apparently it was the same height, the 60.12 meters. As this one that we're talking about. We have time to do our homework, like without a moratorium. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that if that is a tool that's only good for a temporary period of time, I think we have that time and we need to use it well. If we were to get into a bind where we thought we needed time for a specific set of tasks to be finished, I think that is possibly on the table in that circumstance, but I'm not sure that it gains us anything at this moment. I think we have a timeline worked out for the processes we need to understand what a project would potentially look like. So leave that to other commissioners. And
I appreciate that comment, Commissioner Willie, and I tend to agree. I don't think it's necessary option right now. And I think that time is on our side already, in the sense that we've confirmed this evening that no wind projects have been proposed, no applications are in the pipeline. And I hear many people's concern that this is the first step. This is what opens the door. I appreciate that fact. And we also clarified that there's a minimum of 2 years data that needs to be gathered. And quite frankly, that data could say that, as many of you have stated, it's not viable to build a project here. So I think that a moratorium is not an appropriate measure to take at this point, though it's helpful to understand sort of the context and limitations in which that may be a tool to use in the future, depending on how the regulations move through the Planning Commission and the public process. I think time will tell, but I don't believe that it's an appropriate or necessary measure at this time. And I also, I mean, based on my limited research, I mean, getting a meteorological evaluation tower is a first step to determining whether or not there's viability of a project, just as last year, a request for the temporary business unit or use permit to put a device out and measure meteorological information for solar is a necessary step to determining viability. And I don't believe that there are any companies who would be submitting a request for a project without having gathered that data first. So in that sense, I think that time really is on our side to explore all of the concerns. And for anybody who might have been paying attention, and I know some of you in this room were, to the solar regulation process throughout 2021 and into 2022, our staff was very thorough in researching, gathering information, the Planning Commission, and also really took their time to understand all of the issues and concerns of the public and really requested consistent feedback and engagement. So to Commissioner Willie's point, you know, this is sort of just the beginning of these public conversations, as I think has been noted by a few folks, and we welcome that. We want people to stay engaged in the conversations, raise the concerns, ask clarifying questions, help us get good, help the Planning Commission and staff first get good information and understand your concerns in order to write good regulations so that there are parameters by which it is possible to even seek wind or solar permit, as the example is last year. So we're sort of in that same cycle as I see it, and that there's a bit of a long road ahead with the Planning Commission, and then ultimately us again in determining what those regulations look like and how they take into account the concerns of our residents.
Want to turn on my microphone. I want to thank everybody for coming out and sharing your thoughts and your perspectives. For some of you, it's a long drive up here, and I appreciate that. I wish we could come more often to you and where you are and visit with you in your neighborhood.
Second that.
Yes, and maybe we'll come up with some ways to do that. One thing that I think is really important to consider in this project is you have to consider the individual project. It's seductive to want to look at wind energy as a whole and the entire environment of renewable energy, and then apply some of those thoughts to this one particular application. I think we have to look at each application that we get, and if we're going to apply something to wind energy on the whole, we need to apply it as a set of regulations. You know, it needs to be a zoning code. It needs to be, we need to look at it in totality. And then once we have those regulations in place, we look at each project as it comes to us within those regulations. That can be frustrating because we can see a threat or perceive a threat of, you know, I like viewscape, I like that word a lot. Viewscape, you know, being infringed upon by a wind turbine. And so I'm going to do whatever I need to do to keep that threat as far away from me as possible. So I understand or I empathize with that fear of a meteorological tower being put up, that's the first step in the door. And yet we hear that argument a lot. You know, we hear a lot of people coming and saying to us, when that road goes in, development will happen. Or when you create, you know, one set of regulations, that means it's coming. And what I would ask of you is to trust this process, right? That you have elected leaders who listen, who think about every project that comes forward, who, you know, hear what your concerns are. We might not always agree. We might weigh different values. One of the values we are going to have to weigh is how we're going to sustain our society on the energy resources that we have. And that's very difficult. We have that discussion maybe coming up with quarries, right? Quarries are a tough issue because nobody wants a quarry, near their home. Nobody wants to hear blasting. And yet we need those resources for the very roads. I'll get his name here in just a second. For the very roads that Mr. Horton talked about, right? We need those resources. We need gravel and it needs to come from somewhere. So that's a balance that we have to strike. We're going to do that, I believe, in regulations and figuring out what that's like. I guess the point of my comments are there's a process for this. It's important to know what we're focused on in this part of the process. And for me, that's really important that we don't get too far down the line and saying, well, we're protecting against a fear that we don't know if it's actually coming or not. And we may look back and say, that was the thing. Or we may say, we took each step along the way in the process and considered the benefits and the losses that are going to happen with no matter what we're looking at, whether it's roads or developments or quarries or solar or all these things that are really hard for neighborhoods to consider. So those are just some of my initial thoughts right off the bat.
Commissioner Willie, do you have any other thoughts you wish to share?
I'm a scientist by training and I like data. I like making decisions with data. And I think that's going to be a vital piece to how we have the rest of the discussion. So I think there are pieces that we need to add to the puzzle before we can have conversations with the community about like what is a viable project for us. So there's a long road ahead.
I appreciate those comments, and I really appreciate the discussion this evening and the opportunity to learn a lot of new things and make notes of things to learn more about. And personally, that's always kind of an exciting part of these processes. And sometimes people make fun of how slow government moves. But I think that in the best case scenario, that's because we are taking our time to understand all of the issues and recognize, to Commissioner Kelly's point, all the steps of the process and to remain present in the step the phase that we're at. And so from that perspective, I think that, and to Commissioner Willie's point, being able to collect data and have a better understanding based on that will be useful to us and will be useful to the public, I think. And so I know that these conversations will continue, and I just want to reiterate that I hope that all of you and your neighbors who maybe couldn't make it this evening and other folks across the county who are interested in these regulations and these potential projects and what their impact is will really stay engaged, both in our public meetings as well as individually with commissioners and staff if you have further questions that you feel haven't been addressed yet and or that you would like to ensure get addressed in the process. So I think that this temporary business use permit is there are mitigations and conditions in place that make it so that I really think I do want to say that I support staff's recommendation that it is permitted use for 1 year with the opportunity to renew. So I'd like to know what fellow commissioners' thoughts are on that. And then interested if there are other conditions besides the ones listed by staff that feel necessary to include given the conversation we've had tonight.
I'd just like to hear from staff maybe a little bit, what would cause the application to not be renewed after 1 year? Are there standards that we're looking at? What would, it seems to me this is a tower pole with wires, trying to figure out what could go wrong. Bird strikes seem to be a thing. What else could go wrong?
If we received a lot of complaints, if there were bird strikes, as you mentioned, those would potentially cause some concerns. This would come back before you in a year for another vote. So it would be up to your consideration as to whether to extend this for another year or not.
Okay, so what kind of complaints? Like what would be a complaint that would be enough to bring it? I mean, we got a whole room of people here who I think would like to register a few complaints, you know, once we have action on this. So,
If there- yeah,
Of the temporary.
okay. Yeah.
It was in violation.
Can you say that, Carl? So
Yes, if there were violations of those conditions, we have lots of eyes and ears all over the county watching out on our conditional uses, our temporary business uses. They know what the conditions are in many cases, and they're very vocal in contacting our office. So if we received those kinds of complaints about violations of those conditions, that would be factored into your consideration next year.
Okay, thank you.
Can you maybe also just elaborate a bit on the or the condition that you have that the county would be able to gain access to the land within 24 hours? And we heard some feedback about that from NextEra and some suggestion from Commissioner Willie about maybe direct contact with the landowner. Can you just address a little bit more what your ideal sort of scenario is? And it sounds to me like if you received complaints about violations or concerns about violations being of the conditions, that is what would prompt you to request that opportunity, aside from sort of the scheduled annual review.
That's correct. If we received a complaint about a violation, we would want to get out there as quick as we could.
And do you have an opinion about being able to have direct contact with the landowner? Because I would, you know, in the instance of conditional use permits, most often, maybe not all of the time, but most often it is the property owner who has that. So that is your direct line of contact. Is that preferable, or can you talk about how that might compare to other temporary business uses where it's a business operating on a piece of land that they don't own?
I believe we do have the property owner's contact information, so we would be able to reach out just to him as well as to NextEra to let them know that we'd like access to the property.
Okay. Tanya, did you have something to add?
Yes. Tanya Voigt, Zoning and Codes Director. Typically, you know, a temporary business use, an example that keeps coming to my mind is an asphalt plant. So when someone is pouring asphalt to create a road, they often put up these temporary batch plants. And in those cases, when we've received complaints, we want to meet actually directly with the applicant, not the landowner, because the landowner doesn't have familiarity with the actual operation happening. So if we received a complaint, we would notify the property owner as well as the applicant to gain that permission, but both would be notified. Whoever gives us the permission to enter the facility first, we're on our way.
So I might weigh in on this one a little bit. I think we heard from community members that they were concerned what kind of partner NextEra would be. And I think this gives them, and we also heard from NextEra that they have lots of land agents in the area, right? And so to me, it seems like a good extension of seeing what kind of partners they would be. If the staff said 24 hours notice, I want to see them there in 24 hours, to be honest with you. And I think that shows, you know, a serious commitment to being good partners in something, and will tell us something. So I'm hesitant to remove or adjust that condition.
I concur with that.
I'll ask staff, Carl, since you're there, do you feel like in the conditions that are listed, do you feel like there's enough protection there that if staff wanted to go out during spring migration and bring somebody to kind of evaluate that you would be able to accomplish that with the regulations we have, or do we need to add any conditions to make that happen?
Yeah, I don't believe we'd need to add any conditions to make that happen.
Okay.
I believe the applicant is well aware that we value wildlife in the county here. So that's something we'd like to keep an eye on.
Okay. And it seems to me that condition about gaining access with 24 hours notice sort of covers that, and it can be maybe scheduled on a regular basis if that's what ends up being determined as a need, in addition to responding to potential complaints or emergencies that might rise. Any other questions for staff at this time? Okay, thank you all. Well, I think based on our conversation that, that we have some consensus around moving forward with approving this temporary business use permit with all of the conditions outlined by staff being maintained as is without any amendment, or additions. Is that accurate? Okay. Well, with that, I will go ahead and make a motion to approve a temporary business use permit request from John Filetto of Nextera Energy for Tower Associates LLC to allow a 60.26 meter met with the conditions recommended by staff.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, well, thank staff for their presentation, applicants for also providing some information, and especially all of the residents who, as Commissioner Kelly said, you have made a long drive, or maybe you have a long way home if we're on your way home. So thank you for coming and sharing your concerns and introducing yourselves to those of us who don't know you yet, and we'll look forward to future opportunities to hear more. With that, we'll move on to item 3.2. Sarah or Jill, would you like to introduce this? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to rewind for just a moment and request a 5-minute break.
Oh, sure.
Should have checked in with fellow commissioners. Can I get a time check and tell me when we're coming back?
I have 7:35, so.
Okay.
We're reconvening at
So-
7:40.
We will reconvene at 7:40. Thank you. We will jump back in and I'll turn it over to you for real now, Jill, to introduce our next regular item.
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, we brought to you all the initial draft of the legislative statement. We had a good conversation about some potential additions, some areas of emphasis. After going back and crafting some proposed additions that are highlighted in the version, the updated version that's in your, attached to the agenda, and having some checking back with Little Government Relations, and Mallory is online with us for any questions or additional conversation. Bringing back an updated copy of the statement to you all for discussion or potential approval today.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions from commissioners about those updates? Okay. How about you, Commissioner Willie?
Always have questions. No, I really love the improvements. I appreciate the statement overall, and a lot of great talking points for working with the state. I did want to see if there is, for distributed energy generation, if there is anything coming forward on the state level that maybe needs us to weigh in on. It's something that Kansas isn't very strong on, and our community needs some help with. So I mean, I don't know that that is specifically needing to be in here, or if it can be referenced through kind of some other more general statement, but that is something also that I'd like to keep an ear out for at the state level.
Mallory, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that is certainly something that we will keep our eyes and ears open for, and you know, of course, it's up to the will of the commission. I think if you all want to include something about this, but I certainly think that we have crafted a very strong environment and sustainability section that kind of broadly speaks to those type of issues. So certainly if that's an issue that comes up, I think that the language we have in here really correlates with that nicely.
Can we follow up to that, Commissioner Willie?
No, I think just putting that out there for the discussion probably flags it for all of us. Another item which I think is possibly past the legislature and waiting on the executive branch, but I don't know that for sure, is the ground emergency transport, medical transport. And that's another way for states that don't have a Medicaid expansion to pull down some additional Medicaid dollars specifically for emergency medical transport. So something that I've been talking with Chief Llewellyn of LDCFM. So likely this is past when we can ask Mallory to help us with it, but if you hear other things, if I'm wrong about where it is in that process, just anything that you might hear would be helpful.
Oh, go ahead.
And I would add, no, I think one of the things that Mallory and Stuart do a great job is updating us on where things are at inside of state agencies and bodies. I don't know that it doesn't, since it's already been passed by the legislature, I don't think it makes sense to put on the legislative.
Yes. I'm not sure that is entirely.
I believe it has been, and Mallory could clarify that piece, but they're really great at helping us monitor if something gets stuck or if we need any questions or if we need to try to follow up where it's at inside an agency, we can certainly do that.
And I was just going to say the same thing, especially when things get going, there's a lot more information in those reports. And I think I always encourage staff and commissioners to engage with Stuart and Mallory directly, and they're incredibly responsive. And when things come up, they'll give you all the information that you need.
All right. Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Any other questions that brings up? Okay, thanks, Mallory. Oh, go ahead.
No questions. Just I really appreciate the section on seniors and vulnerable adults. That was very well written and I think hit some of the issues that we had brought up in our last conversation. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you raising that issue and asking for some stronger language around that, Commissioner Kelly. Okay, well, we'll open this up for public comment. Is there anybody here who wishes to provide public comment on this item? Okay, seeing no such indication, I'll double check for virtual hands. All right, we'll close public comment, bring this back for any further comments from the commission. This is not an item that we take any action on, but if, I'm sorry, it is. I'm sorry, I'm a little discombobulated this evening. So if without any further comments from commissioners, or I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the 2023 legislative statement.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Mallory.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to item 3.3, a brief update on the 5-member commission and a preview for our town hall tomorrow.
Thank you, commissioners. And here is an item that we don't need you to take action on tonight.
Thank you.
We wanted to just put this on the agenda today as a preview for our public conversation tomorrow night at the Flory Building. And Jamie Hsu is here with us. I think we'll get him moved into the panel to just provide any questions or comments for commissioners in advance of this. And I included in the packet are some, and I want to say, I feel like calling these proposed maps at this time is a bit premature. These would be just options for consideration to get the conversation started and to get the commission and the public thinking about them. I don't want there to be any notion that these are recommended in necessarily any way. Obviously, it is just something to begin to have the community to begin thinking about how commission districts should be formed. And I really just want to have this as an opportunity for commissioners if they have any questions in advance of tomorrow night.
He was there and then I moved him over and he disappeared.
Him, so maybe his internet fell out on him or something like that. But hopefully we can get Jamie. Oh, there he is. Just I don't know that Jamie was planning on making a formal presentation tonight on the item, but just is available if the commissioners have questions.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for being with us and sticking with us this evening. I don't have any questions for you. I do appreciate Sarah sort of making a point that the 4 current sort of map options or ideas of what some different districts could look like is not they aren't the only options, and they aren't proposed or recommended maps, but certainly throughout this conversation, our commission has been, and staff, certainly I know Jamie has been fielding these conversations quite a lot over the past year, and lots of people have been asking to see maps and what things could look like. So now that voters have said yes, and we've canvassed the election, we've got, at this point, 1 month left to figure out what these new maps will look like. So we're on a pretty tight deadline, but we really really want public input and to hear what the values of community members who voted for this and asked to have 2 additional members join this Board of County Commissioners, what they value and make sure that we give an opportunity to answer questions about the process. So I appreciate that this is on the agenda as an opportunity to highlight that and invite the public one more time to join us tomorrow evening over at the Flory Building. I don't know if commissioners have any specific questions for Jamie, or if Jamie, there's anything else you want to add to sort of the preview for the town hall.
I missed Sarah's introduction. I had to move rooms. I didn't have a good connection. So no, I think it's good to kind of just say that these are just discussion points with these maps. These aren't, I fielded some phone calls today where people thought these were the maps. And they're really just kind of a discussion point. We took, I think it's pretty clear, we took some of the points that the public had mentioned to us, and then that's where these maps kind of come from.
We ask Jamie to cover the rules of this game. There are not very many, but I think the public would like to know kind of what are the parameters of what we need to cover within these maps.
Yeah, so what the law basically says is that each district has to be compact and contiguous. The definition of those words can be used in different ways. But the contiguous part, you can't have one section in one part of the county and then another part of that district in another part of the county. So they have to connect. Under the law, the keeping townships whole is very important. You can split a township, but the preference is that a township remains whole. That becomes really hard for Wakarusa because you have North Wakarusa north of Lawrence, and then you have the rest of Wakarusa south of Lawrence. And so it's already split by the city of Lawrence. Each one of the commission districts, a sitting commissioner can't be moved into one of the new districts. So the first, second, and third have to include your residents because you have to stay within your district. So that's kind of a guideline and a parameter. As far as it says that we should be as equal as possible, recognizing with the 2020 census that people have already moved. So these numbers already represent kind of a snapshot that's maybe not the reality right now. So what Kansas Legislative Research says, they shoot for about a 5% deviation of the ideal number, and the ideal number is 23,700. I think getting a little closer than 5%, 5% is like, I think a deviation of about 1,000. That's a pretty broad range. So you don't have to get perfect to that number. You need to get as close as possible. From an election standpoint, we would really love to not split up precincts and create more ballot styles. But if we necessarily do, we need to split up a precinct, we can. And the other thing that kind of nationwide is always kind of talked about is keeping communities of interest together. So kind of looking at, are there, you don't really want to like split Eudora in half or Baldwin in half for a county commission district. So you want to kind of look at your communities of interest. So those are kind of the parameters that we use.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jamie. And that idea of splitting communities of interest in half might be a good practice for the state legislature to look at. So I think it may be helpful to just, for those folks who haven't looked at these ideas, I mean, there are some general ideas that are in these maps based on what we've heard from the community. So, for example, the one you've titled, and thank you for putting titles on it, cities really sort of separates out, Baldwin, Eudora, and even Lecompton in this design here. And I think that's something for us to think about, and I'm excited to hear from the community about it tomorrow night. I think those are the things, the ideas, the themes that it would be important to hear from the community on, because sometimes they compete against each other. So if you're thinking, well, we need one district as the map called county, right, that mostly, has the largest possibility of having a commissioner from the unincorporated area, then that would bring those cities together. And so, which value do we think is the theme there? The spokes one, I think, helps people see that there's, some city and some unincorporated area. What would happen if we did that? Can you talk a little bit, Jamie, about the Wakarusa version and sort of what you were thinking, or what values might be around that one?
Well, it originally started out with, if there's one area of our county that really just got sliced up in redistricting between Senate, House, State Board, it was the Wakarusa Valley. South of Lawrence just got split up. In the August election, they had 30 different ballot styles. They ended up with completely new state representative that's now represents them out of Shawnee. So that originally started out with, is there a map that kind of keeps the Wakarusa Valley whole? Just kind of from my standpoint is they bore the brunt of redistricting. So I don't really want to split them 3 or 4 ways after they've kind of already done that. An interesting thing that came out of that map, in my opinion, so that's where that came from, was, is there a way to keep Wakarusa as whole as possible? If you look at it, it includes Eudora, Baldwin, the Wakarusa Valley, and Southeast Lawrence, which you could also argue are the ones that are going to be impacted the most from the Panasonic project. And so you would have a county commissioner that would have all of those areas in there. That wasn't the intention of it. The intention really was, how could we keep the Wakarusa Valley with one commissioner?
Thank you for walking us through that. I just think this is part of this discussion, is to get these ideas out there and what people are thinking. So I hope that everybody hears that these maps are not, this isn't the proposals and we're voting among maps. But this is just to sort of hear what maybe some of those competing values are that are showing up as we start to figure out how to divide up Douglas County into equal districts, and also think about the communities that they represent.
I guess I would also add to that, my plan is to place this on your agenda for December 7th to discuss feedback from the public forum tomorrow night. And then, what I would also say in advance of that, if there are maps that, you don't necessarily, that as you're going through this process and you hear from the community that you don't like, we can eliminate some of those, or we can tweak some of those. And so that kind of feedback is going to be important, and you can share that with me and Jamie, and then we can have additional maps drafted and placed in the packet for next week. I also do want to add, and I was looking at my phone, Carrie Britt just mentioned, we have a feedback form on our website. So additionally for folks who can't come to the public hearing or the town hall meeting tomorrow night and are just interested, please go to our website and you can provide feedback that we will share, put in our commission packet, share with commissioners as we continue forward with this decision. We do need to select maps by the end of the year. So I'll continue to just place this on our agenda until we get to that resolution point. As we've said, my hope is our last meeting of the year is December 14th. If we do not get that done, we have 2 more Wednesdays in which we can meet in December to get this ironed out. But I do anticipate we're going to get a lot of great feedback tomorrow night.
I have a value that I'd like to share with other commissioners and kind of get some feedback and see where you're at also. But when I look at the maps, I look at how much of the territory that I'm already connected to do I get to keep. And so that's something that, because there are some pretty wide shifts within near where I live. So that's a value that I bring to it. And I don't know if you feel the same way about that, or if that's, as I'm tinkering with maps in my own head, trying to guess what you might want is harder than you think.
I appreciate you sharing that, Commissioner Willie. I mean, I think you and I in particular, we have very large geographic districts as it currently stands, representing the western half and the eastern half of the county. And Commissioner Kelly's district is much more dense and compressed and compact, truly compact by comparison. So I think that I haven't actually played around with the maps too much yet. Jamie, I'm actually glad I didn't receive it before today because I opened it this afternoon and I could tell I was going to get really sucked in with some color by number exercises. So I think that I'm really interested in hearing the feedback tomorrow at the town hall. I think throughout this entire process, from when we first started discussing it in 2021 with the public and the listening session that we had, really hearing from folks what they value and how those new districts will look like, I think will have a lot of influence. Also, the uniqueness for me is that I've actually moved since being elected. And so the address that I filed to run for office for is in the southern part of Lawrence, and now I am in North Lawrence. And so I know that my district will shrink considerably based on population and based on that geographic contiguousness. And so anyway, I don't think I have a strong opinion one way or the other. I'm really excited and eager to hear what folks have to say about the options that are in front of us. But certainly our two districts will be significantly shrunk, most likely.
All three, actually.
Well, all three,
Yeah.
yes.
And I guess that's something that I have had to come to terms with as having just won a reelection, is that those people who elected me, some of them may have a different commissioner. And that's just something I think, as people are thinking through this and, your mind has to shift a little bit there, and for me, it was like, wow, yeah, okay, that'll make sense, right? And so I think what's important to remember is while we represent districts, we represent all of Douglas County. And I think, as illustrated this evening, and when we're talking about some, that I think certainly there are issues that are important to different areas of Douglas County. We shouldn't say that there aren't different values there, but that doesn't mean we can't hear and understand and empathize and learn about values in places where we don't reside or districts that are outside of our own. And we've heard a lot of that, I think, over the past 2 years, and I frankly disagree with it, quite a bit of it, and because I think you can not live in a certain place and still understand what's important to that community and still represent them as their Douglas County commissioner, even if it's not by district.
I would say that many generations of commissions here have done a great job about valuing the whole Douglas County and the whole community. And I think that's something that we just need to keep saying among ourselves and also to the public as we go through this process and as other commissioners get elected to fill in these additional 2 spots, is that yes, it's by district and that's your kind of first point of contact, but I deeply care about the whole of Douglas County, edge to edge, center out, everything. And, but I also, as a geographer, I find myself attached to these neighborhoods that I know people and I've walked these, and I just realized that some of those I will have to give up, and looking through the maps and realizing that I'll have a little loss to deal with out of this is just something a little bit more than I anticipated.
I appreciate that point, and I can relate to that feeling, certainly. And my hope about the conversation tomorrow night at the town hall and continued conversation with the community is that it's really robust and nuanced and talking about I think the importance is identifying some shared values and common threads and themes that we hear from folks, and that we are careful not to fall into tropes of us versus them, city versus rural. I just don't think that those binaries hold much weight, and I think that they tend to not leave room for us to really acknowledge and appreciate how seriously I believe the county commission takes representation of the whole county, as has been pointed out by fellow commissioners, and that the responsibility and weight of what we have the authority and responsibility to do on behalf of constituents has to take into account the entire county. So districting is quite a different thing at a local level than it is at a state or national level. And I hope that we have a lot of great conversation tomorrow and civil discourse that avoids those conversations of us versus them, which I think is an easy thing to sometimes fall into and frame redistricting as, and where this conversation maybe started. But I think that there are a lot of benefits, and there's going to be increased representation and more voices on behalf of the county to join these robust discussions and give input. And you know, it'll be an interesting thing for us to all adjust to having the ability to speak to another commissioner outside of meetings when that time comes. So that'll be another learning curve for me, especially. I think that will be interesting. So anyway, I am really looking forward to tomorrow, hoping for a lot of turnout and also just continued engagement with us through that feedback form on the website, through direct contact with commissioners, and certainly public comment at our next couple of meetings that are scheduled.
Did we say out loud that is 6:30 tomorrow night at the Flory Building at the fairgrounds?
Right, thank you.
Which is currently in District 2. Off Harper Street for anybody who's not familiar with it. Well, thank you, Jamie. Is there anything you would like to add before we see you again tomorrow night?
The only thing I want to add that's come up past couple days is there's some wrong information out there that believes that there's a like a statewide check of this map. You are the final decision makers on this map. There is not a step after you where there's like a state body that reviews this map. And I've had a lot of people say that they're hearing that, but it is the commission that will decide this map.
Thank you for that clarity. And I guess it's worth mentioning now, and then again, we'll discuss it tomorrow night, but the decision that does lie at the state level with the governor is whether or not new districts will be elected through a special election or the general election. And that part of our decision is making a recommendation about that, but ultimately that will be the governor's choice. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks for being here, Jamie. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you, commissioners, for that good conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing what the public has to say tomorrow. That closes out our regular agenda, and we'll move on to appointments. I know that we have some potential appointments to make to the Peaslee Board. I want to explore with commissioners how urgent it feels to make those appointments, or just hear feedback about other interested parties. I'm aware of 4 folks who have expressed interest, but maybe commissioners are aware of others, and wondering if we want to potentially stagger recommendations for those appointments, or defer it for further conversation. I also know that Kevin Kelly from Peaslee Tech is here, so if we have any questions for him, now might be a good opportunity.
So I know the structure of the board is being changed somewhat. Is that something we could ask Kevin to talk to us about, or Sarah wants to give us an update on why there's so many recommendations needed at the moment?
So Kevin, you're welcome to correct anything I get wrong here. The Peaslee Board of Directors asked the city and the county to reformulate its governance board structure. And we passed, we discussed bylaws to that this spring, to that effect. Both the city and the county approved that structure and changed this now. The Peaslee Board membership in the past has changed over time. And I think was quite a bit larger. Now, under this new structure, it will be a 9-member board. 7-member board with 4 appointments from Douglas County and 3 appointments from the city of Lawrence. And the structure was put into place to have representatives of certain areas, have stakeholders and representatives for those efforts. So the county's appointees are a K-12 education position, a post-secondary education position, a financial institution position, and then an at-large appointment.
So it's okay. I think it's important to get a board there before January, you know, and so I think then, and I'm sure Kevin has some onboarding that he'd like to do with that board and transition that. I think for me, the 3 positions that are very specifically related to fields, that financial institution, post-secondary, K-12, I always find that those are harder to find than the at-large position, and would be comfortable tonight with some of the recommendations that 2 of these 3 I know very well, making the recommendation that Kevin has forwarded to us. And I'd recommend we hold off just a little bit on that at-large position. I know we've had a couple others. We had one that came in early in the summer, right after we changed the bylaws. And I have been remiss in not following up on that one. And so I just like to visit a little bit with a couple of other at-large. And that at-large one is a lot easier to fill because it's not corralled into that certain specific, but Bill DeWitt is one for K-12 education. Bill's a perfect person for that because the USD 497 has a huge investment in Peaslee Tech, both financially and also just geographically, and tying that in. And Bill runs the Career and Tech Ed program over at College and Career Center just next door. He also is responsible for adult ed for the school district. I'm going to reel off all the things Bill does, and you're just going to shake your head, but welcome to the school district. And he also does diploma completion, JDC. So he's tapped into a number of groups and categories of students that will be accessing Peaslee Tech. And I know that we heard at one of our meetings from Shannon Kimball, the president of the Lawrence Board of Education, the value of having a USD 497 number on that. That is not the only school district that sends people to 497, but I think it is the largest for sure. So I think Bill would be a great appointment. Maybe we could just go one at a time if you want with some of those. We can talk through it. If Bill has some stuff to add, I mean, Bill's not here. If Kevin has some things to add about others, maybe we could do it that way. That's just a suggestion. Commissioner.
I do really like to have conversations with people before we put them on boards or know that somebody else has had it. And I have been remiss. I have not made those outreaches yet. And yet I feel bad making Kevin wait on his board. I thought there were strong names, all of them that were put forward. But I am also comfortable to do a little bit more homework. If we wanted to move forward with Bill DeWitt, and if there are others that people feel strongly about need to happen now, that could be one conversation, or otherwise we could have some more conversations and come back.
I think this is Commissioner Reed. I appreciate the need to make some movement on this and not let the end of the year kind of slip through everybody's fingers. And I appreciate your point, Commissioner Kelly, that the at-large position is the one that's a bit easier to fill, and that there may be some a few options for us to consider, but that the other 3 are sort of specialty spots. And, I know I trust I've had good conversations with Kevin about what that board membership would look like. So I'm comfortable moving forward with, as you suggested, Commissioner Kelly, one at a time of the 3 positions that are sort of specific. And then hold off on that at-large position with a commitment to bring that back for conversation amongst us before the end of the year.
Commissioner Reed, did you say you have other names that you've talked to or people who've been interested other than what we've been sent so far?
I do not personally, but I know, well, like Commissioner Kelly mentioned that somebody had expressed interest earlier in the year that was not in that at-large position that's not included in the list. So if we may have an opportunity to talk to more people about that and then have a choice to make amongst folks.
Well, I would say that the name that's been put forward for the at-large position, I'm also very happy with. So I think we should leave open more than one spot if we're going to have conversations so that we have, a range of positions yet to fill.
Okay. Well, how about this? If we, since we've heard about Bill DeWitt, we take that up as an option. I'm familiar, a little bit familiar with him, and appreciate Commissioner Kelly explaining sort of more about what all he is plugged into and what he might bring to it. So I'd be comfortable moving forward with that if there weren't any reservations, and then we can talk about the next two and maybe determine from there if there's an opinion you have of Commissioner Willie about what other seat to leave sort of open-ended for now.
Are we comfortable having a decision on Bill DeWitt and saving the others for next week?
Sure. I'm fine with that. I think we just have to, we have to get going. And, I think cities had theirs for quite a while and we've been focusing on other things, which is understandable, but I don't want to leave Kevin hanging much longer. So I'll make a motion to approve Bill DeWitt at this time.
I'll second that. All those in favor? Aye. Okay.
And then maybe we'll wait till next week and I'll do our homework and follow up with some of these. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any other appointments to discuss right now? Okay.
I think we've had other conversations and I think perhaps there's still, I know I have some that have fallen through that I've tried to put together. You want to talk?
Do we have fire district board?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys made the fire district 3 appointments a while back.
I think we decided not to do it because Commissioner Reed was not here. I still have that email, but that was last week. Do we want?
I have those if you want to read, if you want me to read them, because they have been kind of waiting a while.
And which fire district?
The consolidate. Oh,
no, it's Fire District 3,
okay.
replacing Rob Harris and John Tall. The recommendation was Mike Farley and Roger Endo.
I did have those conversations and I'm very happy to move forward on those.
Would you like to make a motion?
It's in front of me, but I would.
I'd make a
Okay, go ahead.
motion to approve Mike Farley for Fire District 3 board. We usually don't do them all together because.
Yep. Second that. On all those in favor? Aye.
And I'd make a motion to approve Roger Endo to the Fire District 3 board.
Second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks for having your computers, commissioners. Keep us on track with those things. I usually use the sticky note on my desktop to make those notes. So thank you for keeping us on track. Okay, I think if there's no other imminent appointments to make, we can move on to, oh, go ahead.
We've been contacted or forwarded a name of the fair board for the Eudora Township, but it's not on the list yet. Is that still kind of pending finding out if the previous person is actually leaving or?
Yep, that's.
Normally, I don't put them on your list until it's ready, and they're about 2 months early, which is fine. Fair board always is. So.
And that I didn't realize that the interested person, assuming it's the same one, had reached out to all commissioners, but I intend to follow up with her since Eudora is currently in my district, and discussed with Sarah today, making sure we know what that cycle is since it hadn't been shown up on our list quite yet. So.
And thank you for addressing. I did have a conversation with her, but I'm glad to wait on your conversation and recommendation.
All right, thank you.
I would say generally the commissioner for the district makes the fair board appointment. It's one of the few things that happens kind of by district.
Fair board and CJCC, right?
Opening on a planning commission that came.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
That's something that we need to start thinking about.
Well, I've been asking and being turned down.
Yes. So this is a plug to the public. If you have a love for dense documents and land use and planning and all the nitty gritty details that are very necessary for us to have good folks to dig into and research and discuss, we want to know your name and we'd love to have a conversation with you about our planning commission. It's interesting stuff. Okay, I think we can move on to miscellaneous and we'll start with Sarah's memo.
Thanks, commissioners. You have an updated memo in your packet. Just want to remind any members of the public that are paying attention, you have until midnight tonight to complete your survey on related to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. We're really seeking some opinions on how we put together our 2023 and beyond strategic plan and potential focused areas. So hope folks take some time to fill that out. In addition to that, I just want to point commissioners out that swearing in for Carl Folsom III will be sworn in as a district judge for the 7th Judicial District here on the 2nd at 3. I don't think you guys had gotten that notice yet, so I wanted to make sure you had it. In the new Division 7 courtroom, which will be a mystery to me, I'm not quite sure what 7's going to be yet. I think it's old 4, but I'm not sure. I'll find out for you. Hopefully court security will know. And Robert Benecki has been appointed to a statewide board on the Commission of Emergency Planning and Response as a representative from KEMA. And so we're really proud of Robert's appointment. And in addition to that, I'm super proud to announce that Douglas County CJCC has been selected as one of the 12 new members of the National Network of Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils, supported by JMI, so Justice Management Institute. This is a really big deal. There are very few criminal justice coordinating councils that have been a part of this. We're joining really leaders in this field and really communities that are really dealing with challenges related to criminal justice head on. So I'm really excited about that. And also just want to announce that our dear Heritage Program Coordinator, Caitlin Stanley, is leaving us and moving on to a wonderful opportunity as the Executive Director of the Kansas Land Trust. But we're going to begin to work on filling that position. Just want to mention, so next week we do have a work session at 4 with Artists Helping the Homeless and Reentry Supportive Housing Project. And we will be back in the commission chambers next week. We are getting rental equipment for the audiovisual piece, and that's going to be put in, I believe, tomorrow. So, and barring any future disasters inside the courthouse, we will be back inside the old courthouse for the December 7th meeting. And just really appreciate the flexibility and understanding of the judges and the district judges and the district court for letting us use their facilities and working with us so thoughtfully in this process. And I think that's all I have, commissioners.
Do we need to notice, I will likely be at the Youth Entrepreneurship Challenge tomorrow morning?
That has actually been canceled, well, postponed until the spring. Jill, do you want to provide more detail briefly?
I'm working to identify another date that we did not get a good number of applications. So I'm working hard to get that information out as soon as possible. I've been trying to coordinate with the schools first and foremost on getting that information out, but yeah, it has been postponed. I apologize. I didn't get that to you.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
Anything else for the good of the order, commissioners?
I just noticed Chief Llewellyn is here, and thank you for coming. I didn't know if you wanted to address the commission or you just were looking for something to do on a Wednesday night. Thank you for being here.
You picked a good meeting where the seats are more comfortable. So when if you comes to a future commission meeting, we'll be back on hardwood, next week.
I told my wife this would probably be a quick meeting.
You will
Oh.
It's almost city commission level meeting length.
Anything else, commissioners? Okay, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.